we're continuing on talking about spiritual practices or spiritual exercises. And this is the third talk, and we'll take up right where we left off last time. Now, there is an old spiritual maxim that says, everything is in everything. Everything is in everything. What that is another way of saying the universal spirit is universal. It is in everything, and everything is within it. Spirit is spirit. It is not in its essence material or particulate, but it permeates every particle in which participates in it. I think we all remember, it's usually about 5th or 6th grade, where they show you a picture of what they think an atom looks like, and it's a center, and it's got the orbits of the electrons around it. And I think we all remember that experience when we see that and we say, that looks like a solar system. It was analogous to the sun with planets whizzing around it. And that was a wonderful feeling of discovery for a child. It's the discovery of how unity in creative activity is basically analogous. No matter what the scale of the plane may be, because in that case both were on the dense physical plane. The atom and the solar system were analogous. It's just a simple recognition that analogy works through all planes. It's the principle that we call the Hermetic axiom that was stated very clearly by the 7th century Roman alchemist, and it goes, as above, so below. What has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice. But that's another way of saying, it's a more sophisticated way of saying it, but it's another way of saying everything is in everything. There's a unity. Now, in these talks, we haven't gotten to talking about the principle of cause and consequence, or action and reaction, or however we wish to look at it. And we're probably not going to get to talking about that because those are very deep and hard talks. Because I worked on understanding them in ways that I've not seen anywhere else. But when one does look at cause and consequence, one can see that they are two states within a unity. That the cause is looking at the state from one side, and the consequence is looking at it from the other side. So that in the horizontal, there is a unity of cause and consequence that is permeated by the spirit as much as the unity that maintains its reality analogously vertically through the planes. Everything is in everything. Now, last time we spoke very sketchily about progressive observation exercises. And we talked about them at various levels of our being. We didn't talk about phenomena because you get that when you do the activity. We'll begin to do more of that by seeing that when we looked at that progressive observation and discrimination, we saw that there were parallels, and that those parallels were analogous. And we're going to keep on doing that sort of thing, because the more that we can come to the realization that unity pervades everything, the sooner we can appreciate and understand an experience of something because it is of a common unity. When we loop back to things like that, that is sometimes called the spiral method of education. Now, when we began this sub-series talking about developing criteria for evaluating spiritual exercises, we talked about some of the dangers. Last time we actually began talking about exercises. We began with observational exercises, and we did that for several reasons. Obviously, one is that we can't possibly hope to progress except by recognizing where we are and what it means. It's our foundation. It's our starting point. We're in the chemical region of the physical world, and that is just right. It's a very limited world, extremely limited, and that is just right. The great seers of the Rosicrucian order tell us at the very beginning of our evolutionary creation, when we were mineral-like, but the cosmos itself was no more dense than a concrete thought, when we began to be specialized, or when we began to be separated, the very first things that were being put into what were going to become our physical bodies were the seeds of what would become the senses. So our senses have a very long evolutionary history. And there's a reason for that. It's no use to go through an evolutionary experience if we can't sense what's happening, if we can't be awake to what's happening. Now this tells us two things about the senses. One, that they are very important to our evolutionary development, and that they are very old. And because they are very old, they've been developed to a very high evolutionary level. However, our objective waking consciousness is not so very old. It's a relatively new thing in terms of evolution. So, being infantile in our objective consciousness, it's just about perfect for us to have the limitations of this world. Because the stubborn limitations of this world help us, through our senses, to realize an objectivity without being lost in illusion, which might happen if this world weren't so stubborn in its objectivity. It's a very important thing. We often chafe at the notion that here we are so limited, there are only certain things we can do, but that very limitation is good for us. And it's good for us in more than ego humbling. It's important because we have a very small window of time here in this dense plane. The opportunity to develop objectivity and to be very exacting about it, to be very precise about it, is a short time. That's because holding this dense material world in the state of density that it is held is at the limit of the depth of concentration of the spiritual being we call God. So, as the old farmers used to say, we have to make hay while the sun shines. So we have to work on objectivity and do it as much as we can with it while we're here. In terms of our nascent objectivity, it's a good thing that we can see an object with only one perspective at a time. It's a good thing that the object sits still and is inertial so that we can get the heft of it and feel its texture. because in this way we develop very basic objectivity. To the degree that we develop objectivity in this world, will we be able to transplant it into the other worlds. That is what the world of form is all about. That by learning to be in touch with form and be objective about it and being very painstaking about it, to that degree will we be able to unfold objectivity in the higher worlds. Much harder to have objectivity there if we haven't planted the seed here. Because everything moves, everything changes, everything has so many facets that it's hard to do it. The quality of our objectivity and understanding, and even the appreciation of our entire evolutionary career, depends on what we do right now. So all of the people that are in a big hurry to dissolve this world and to get on to higher things may be mistaken if they're not working with their senses. This is a big failure of science right now. Science has transferred the extension of the senses from the human to devices. Now, it's very good for the mineral kingdom that's learning through becoming those devices, but it's not very good for people who need to extend their perceptive abilities and not suddenly leave off and have everything done by machines. Not a good thing at all for us. So in this respect, our life right here and now is an important miniature, an important microcosm of our general evolutionary life. We've all seen how many people have the same experiences in life and how some people get more out of those experiences and grow, while others, because they don't put themselves into the experiences, they falter and fail. Some individuals are going to get more out of the general evolutionary creation than others. So we know better, and we're forewarned, and that's what it is important for us. It depends on what we put into life, what we get out of it. That's one of the things about the Spirit. It stretches according to how it is applied. And we can probably all go through the evolution and meet the evolutionary standards. But we can go through the evolution and do so much more. That's what initiation means. It means that we're living at a higher level. We've begun to live as people in the future will live, and in the same time span, in the same creation, the same opportunity, we're going to get more out of it. So I'm being a little bit repetitive here, but it's important that we appreciate the material world. We've said it before, and now we can see more clearly. Exercises are designed to help us function better in ongoing life. Spiritual exercises enhance our psychic and spiritual performance, just like fingering exercises enhance our piano performance. There is another reason why we started with observational exercises, and that has to do with an order of operations. I'll tell you a story about the order of operations. I remember a time that for a while I intensely studied graphology, handwriting analysis, and I was fascinated by it. I still look into it every now and then. There's some excellent books. I've got a pretty good library of graphology books. I find it very much in handy because you can always pick up a copy of somebody's handwriting and you have an instantaneous notion, or you have a reading of exactly where they're at this moment, which is not the same thing as astrology. Sometimes to see where a person is at astrologically, it takes hours and hours of mathematics and thinking on things to get at where they're at right now. But if you have the handwriting that was just written, that is a crystallization of where their consciousness was. And I was hanging around the Students' Union at the university, and I met this young woman who was charming and who knew she was charming. And she tried to use her charm, and I'd mentioned that I'd been studying graphology. And she said, "Oh, will you look at my handwriting?" And I looked at it, and I was kind of embarrassed, and I said, "You've got this tendency and this tendency and this tendency, and when you put them all together, it indicates that if you're not careful, you could have criminal propensities." And she was rather upfront and said, "I have already been indicted." Theft. She was in love with a man that was a heroin addict, and he was a second-story man, and he was teaching her the business. He would steal objects to pay for a heroin habit, and she was in love with him. And so he taught her to steal, only she got caught at it. And that led me to understand the order of operations. Suppose, for example, you run into a horoscope that shows, or a handwriting that shows a tendency toward criminality and a tendency toward timidity. Obviously, you need to work on the criminality before you work on the timidity. The order of operations is very important, because if you work on getting over the timidity first, you'll have a flagrant criminal. So the seers and the mystics claim that our participation in the evolutionary creation to which we belong has so far been involutionary. We have been increasingly involved in progressively more deep and concentrated states of matter. We have even taken the option to ourselves to go deeper than was intended. So most of our involutionary career has been concerned with building bodies and evolving bodies, but not quite exactly as materialistic science sees it. In this involutionary career, we have been creatures. And it is only recently that we have begun to awaken to self-consciousness. And with that awakening, we have begun to be creative.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I find in communities that the people that are attracted to them are usually people that need a lot of help.
Yep.
And they get the wrong kind of help all the time.
Yes. It's a sad thing.
Very sad.
Because I think everybody's looking for a perfect community, and they, in some ways, almost don't want people there who need help. And that is anti-Christian.
That's right.
Yeah.
Anti-Christian.
I consider it a success that the bookstore is not completely people who are accomplished mystics, and it's not completely troubled people, but that there are both there and that they interact with each other. Every case that I've seen of a family where there has been something like an autistic member or someone that is mentally retarded, it's always been better for the rest of the family. And I think the question that you're asking, should we have that kind of thing? Definitely. We should have the troubled people and the people who need help, and not just a specialized community. But at any rate, in our involutionary career, we have been shaped. We have been worked on, and we've been given every necessary kind of experience by the creative hierarchies. we have been receivers. This has been done because of the order of operations. One has to know what one is dealing with before one can create with it. We have to have developed faculties for the Spirit to work with, to know what the stuff is that it's working with. If we take the life of Buddha, like in that story by Sir Edward Arnold, which is a beautiful poem, it's called The Light of Asia, Buddha could not develop his wonderful compassion until he had experienced sorrow and suffering. It's very hard to be compassionate if you don't know that somebody is suffering. Some psychologists are so radical about this that the experience has to come first, that they say that a human being can't dream something that they haven't had in sensory experience. Of course, they don't realize rebirths. They don't realize our consciousness on other planes. While the principle might be true, their understanding of the principle is not true. So, in the order of things in the creation in which we are participating, the experience precedes expression. We experience something first, and then we can express in it later. Now, sometimes the lag between the experience and the expression is quite long. Sometimes it takes millions of years of working with something before we can understand and do it right. Our essential nature is spiritual. We are becoming creative beings, divine creative beings. And one of the most basic characteristics of any divine being is creativity. God, so to speak, is a creator. When we discover and when we awaken the spirit within, we have that same fullness in us. How does the Bible say it? From the fullness of the heart, the mouth runneth over. When we're filled with the Spirit, we become creative. If we do not have creativity in our lives, it means probably that we don't have a full-blooded spiritual life. Now we're in the early stages of the second half of our evolution. We are in the evolutionary stages now. We're becoming more givers than receivers. We're not taking from the gods so much anymore. We're beginning to give out. We are in fact commanded to do so. In one statement in St. John's Gospel, Christ tells us, "Freely have ye received, now freely give." At another place in the Gospels, it's a very remarkable statement is made. It requires a good amount of interpretation. And that statement is, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, the intention is not to make receivers feel inferior or unblessed. And the intention of that statement is not to break up the poise or the balance between cause and consequence or between action and reaction. It isn't anything like that. We're not trying to destroy the equilibrium that holds the creation in unity as it is held in unity. This is a statement that is evolutionary. It is more blessed to give than to receive, which means we are done as creatures. The gods have a hands-off policy on us, relatively speaking, compared to our earlier evolutionary career, and now we have to give. In fact, it's pretty radical in some ways. I think the Gnostics are right, that before we can really become ourselves spiritually, we have to throw off everything of the gods that is in us. and be what the gods gave to us without the direct influence of the gods. And in that way we become true spiritual beings. But it isn't a matter of throwing things off the way we throw off our parental influence and try to do everything but think the way our parents do. It's a matter of throwing them off by giving, and by giving to other creatures. So that we're part of the gods now. And it is our work to start giving to other things the things that have been given to us. This brings us back to our maxim and how it relates to our topic this morning. Everything is in everything. A little while back, we examined the life cycle. We examined it from birth to death, and from death to third heaven, and then from third heaven back to rebirth. Then we looked at that cycle, we abstracted it out of the life cycle and saw it in everything in life. Because that cycle is in everything we do. We're constantly taking in the external world back to the spirit, forming judgments and getting intuitions about what it means, and then extroverting and interacting with the world. Sometimes thousands of times per second. So that cycle is in everything we do. Everything is in everything. We noted that that cycle in rebirth took somewhere in the approximate time of 1,000 years, or between 750 and 1,250. All depends on how creative we are. We said that that cycle had two principal stages that were introvertive and extrovertive. In the introvertive stage, everything is taken from without and drawn inward to the spirit when we unwind, and the spirit makes deliberate judgments and intuitive judgments. Now, if we look at it, the progressive observation exercise that we discussed last time is actually an accentuation and a perfection of what is done in the introvertive stage of the cycle. We endeavor to observe and to perceive things and events in the external world that constitute our experience. We do that until we can see through the forms and through the objects and see the life that is within and behind them. Moving along very rapidly, we can then drop even the living form, the etheric form, and see with the eye of feeling, and eventually we can take a very big step and see with the mind's eye to see the thought and the intellectual intent behind a desire or behind a vital life activity or behind a form. As we're stating it now, we're stating it in a mental context. In the progressive observation exercise, we observe and observe and observe until we can see through by discriminating what is form and what is life. Or we see what is vitality and what is motivating that vitality. It's always a matter of observing and discriminating the meaning of what it is that we are working on. What we're looking at is something that's based on experience, and it's based on reality. We are not working on a metaphysical system. I remember one time in one of those kinds of discussions where they say, my brother can lick your brother, or my dad can beat up your dad, or my teacher is stronger than your teacher. I remember a young man saying to me once, the group that I study with has more planes than your Rosicrucians do. Planes of consciousness, realms of experience. And my response to that is, what do those realms or what do those planes of existence do? Are they something that are within our experience? This is one of the reasons why we were so careful about introducing all of the different spiritual realms in a way that we could experience them. Because, like in the Shakespeare, we're talking about what is a man. We know that we're more than just a form, and we can experience that we have vitality. We're talking about something that is not an arbitrary metaphysical system. We're talking about reality. We're talking about the way Spirit accomplishes things. The universal Spirit creates in this way. It has an intuitive awareness. It forms ideas, and from those ideas it projects thoughts, and those thoughts have a meaning. And that meaning is later metamorphized into a motivation. And that motivation causes lively action. And the lively action results in some kind of outward, indubitable, external experience. This is a reality. The universal Spirit learns in the same way that we learn. Everything is in everything, and we are microcosmic manifestations of the universal Spirit. We're part of the whole process. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to sharpen our awareness when we're practicing observation and discrimination. So along the way, let's review the first part that we did since talking about spiritual exercises. We've been developing criteria. The first criterion we developed was an awareness of the fact that all spiritual exercises work. Everyone works. Some people try to breathe themselves into heaven, and they find themselves in things that are worse than hyperventilation. The criterion is, since every exercise works, we have to be careful, and we have to select the exercises that result in beings that we want to become like. Because whatever we do as a spiritual exercise, it's going to have an effect. We said clearly that Krishnamurti was right when he said, if you say Coca-Cola enough times, you'll have a profound and remarkable experience. It may not be a very good experience, but it may be a little wild. A second criterion we looked at is that it is wisest to use spiritual exercises that develop general faculties rather than specialized faculties. And we pointed to the fact that idiot savants can sit down and play at a piano for hours at length, but they can't feed themselves. That is the consequence of a specialized development rather than a generalized development. It is a matter of fact that we can develop all kinds of little specialties, but we have to be careful of that. That's dangerous. It isn't called the universal Spirit for no reason. It is because it's universal, and we want our spiritual exercises to awaken us to something that has general capacities. Another thing that we've said about exercises is that they produce clear waking consciousness. We do not want an exercise that puts us to sleep or entrances us or dulls our consciousness. We want, as the Platonist said, light, more light. We want to be more awake, and we want to be improving the acuity of consciousness. The next criterion that we said about spiritual exercises was that they be heuristic. That every exercise is a self-educational exercise if we treat it that way. We gave the example, the first example that happens to someone when they try to concentrate and suddenly they hear noise around them and it distracts them, and some people make this mistake of blocking out the noise rather than being free people and electing to choose what they want. They were successful. When you're successful, you're aware of more things than you were before. That's what the expansion of consciousness means. It means that you can hear all the sounds around you and see all the flashes of light around you. But if you're a free person, you choose the ones that you want, or the one that you want, and you can get to the others later, but you're free. So everything that happens, if you're concentrating and you can't imagine, if you take the spiritual exercise to be heuristic, you say, I need to work on the imagination because that's what I'm weak in. Or, if you don't have the willpower to elect and keep your attention on what you elect to have your attention on, then you say to yourself, I need to work on exercises that develop will so that I am empowered to do what my exercises tell me needs to be done. We're trying to become self-reliant beings. We're not going to rely on the gods anymore, and we're not going to rely on spiritual teachers. We have the ability in ourselves, and if the way we unfold our spiritual being produces self-reliant beings, so much better for us. Now what we're seeing is that exercises have to be based on experiential reality. The things that are really there. We could extend this criterion and say that the very best spiritual exercises are those that are based on cosmological process. If we find that everything in the cosmos is done by cycling deeper and deeper into the material worlds and then deeper and deeper into the spiritual worlds, if we wish to be successful in our in our spiritual exercises, we want to do the same thing. We want to cycle deeper and deeper into prayer. If we're doing healing work, it's just like a little mini creation. We start out and we can turn inwardly so far, and then we cycle back out and we cycle deeper in and deeper and deeper until eventually we get to a very, very deep state where everything is peaceful, and it's exactly like what happens in creation. So exercises, in order to be valid, have to relate us to reality and to be based on the principles that are within reality. This is the reason why we study things like the cosmic conception, especially that second part of the cosmic conception that talks about all the periods and things like that. That's not just an intellectual exercise, and that's just not to impress you. That is to give you principles that work in everyday life, especially in our spiritual exercise. So, we looked at progressive observation. But progressive observation is only half the picture. It's like the introvertive stage of the evolutionary cycle, and it misses the extrovertive stage. Let's start out, though it's not our intent to carry it all the way through, let's start out looking at the extrovertive stage. The exercises for both stages of the cycle begin with concentration. They are all concentrative exercises. They deal with the concentration of attention, the attention of the spirit, which in most people is diffuse. Our consciousness is spread out. Our attention is vague. It's not concentrated. So one might even say that it is a valid criterion for spiritual exercise to see if it results in more accurate and more pinpoint control of our vehicles. Control is exceedingly important. We talked about how in an automobile the brakes have to be 5 to 6 times stronger than the engine because that control is necessary. The steering apparatus of an automobile has to be within a certain tolerance because that is part of the control of it. In extrovertive or creative concentration, the object of attention is internal. And it is created by us doing the same exercise. Just as the first progressive observational exercise we worked with, we just skimmed the surface to give you the idea, and we were not comprehensive. We will do that with this because it's way too vast, and also we want things to remain heuristic. Because anything I tell you might bias you. And anything I tell you might keep you in the attitude saying, oh, I know that. And then you think you really know that and that there isn't anything more to it. Whereas if you practice, do the exercise, you realize there is more to it. Much, much more to it. Self-education means discovering for oneself. That is a joy, and that should in no wise be dull. Now it would seem that we could begin concentrating almost anywhere. Etheric healers, for example, sometimes concentrate on energies in their etheric body, and they focus it outward and lend some of their energy to someone in need for healing, and they start focusing or concentrating their attention right there. That form of concentration is almost as much observational as it is extrovertive. The energy was already there, and they were just merely observing it and redirecting it. Creating the energy is a much different matter. Plato, who was an initiate mystic, had things to say about this matter. He said something to the effect that one cannot heal the stomach without first having healed the head. And one cannot have healed the head without having healed the whole body. And one cannot have healed the body without having healed the soul. By the soul, he meant everything between the spirit and the physical body. Plato, because he was an initiate, was very much aware of the antecedents, the creative antecedents to the physical world. A modern mystic might say, one can't heal a physical condition without changing the vital body. And one cannot really heal the vital body without changing the destructive desires that beat it down or impair it in its function. And one cannot clear up one's desires as long as one is thinking bad thoughts. So the mind is sort of the foundation. We could be more antecedent than that, but that's sufficient because everything phenomenal begins with thinking. Some people may have more problems in the desire nature that require attention. That's not the same thing as trying to get on the ground floor with creativity. The spirit, which is divine and transcendental, cannot itself be ill. But it does need to know about all of its vehicles. And it needs to be in control of them in order to have a healthy personality through which to gain or to help or fulfill the purposes of what we are in. This is no small task, because we have that egoistic pseudo-self that has set up shop. The lower vehicles, and it has arrogated a lot of control to itself, which it doesn't wish to give back to the self. We've mentioned it before, that often we think that the pseudo-self is the real thing, and that when we really do have a spiritual experience, we seem to think it comes from God outside of us, and that it really isn't our true selfhood. So one of the central tasks at this stage of evolution is for the spirit to gain control of its vehicles, to clear them, to correct them, to awaken them, improve them, and use them. Use them for the kind of experience that we can only get while we're here. The spirit, which is we ourselves, is making hay while the sun shines. So we're part of the creative process, and it's our duty to do this. Now, this is a curious thing because everything is done on the fly. Evolution is ongoing. We can't stop because we've made mistakes. We have to keep on going. The show must go on. And because you drop the line, you can't stop the whole show. It's not quite, in exercises we can do that. If we're practicing the piano and we make a mistake, we can say, let's go back to the top. And we can do that kind of thing. So what spiritual exercises represent are marking points. They represent times when, as much as possible, we stop and we work on all of the instruments that we have, developing them, cleaning them, and so on. That's what spiritual exercises like concentration really are. If we say that an acid is concentrated, we say it's pure. It has nothing but that in it. And if our attention is concentrated, it is not spread out all over the place. It is pure in its intent on what it is focused. So concentration is meant for us to get control of our vehicles. So it begins right at the foundation, at the origin of the personality. The idea is simple in some ways. If you get complete control of the mind and think only good thoughts, think only productive thoughts, think only creative thoughts, think only thoughts that are true to the principles of reality, not by some metaphysical system, but by reality itself, then you will have a constant flow of true stuff passing through you, rather than thinking the kinds of thoughts that are destructive and end up as illnesses and things like that. So it is because of the antecedents of the mind that we work with it first. It's sort of like if you really want a clean house, you have to get your fingers behind the rug and lift it up. So it may take time to control our thoughts, and it may take a long time for our thoughts to mature, but the sooner we have impeccable control of our thoughts, the sooner our life will mature into something that is not untrue. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that the mind is very supple, and it's very amenable, because the mind is the youngest of our vehicles. It's in its very first stage of development. It's like that old statement goes, as the twig is bent, so grows the oak. The habits that you establish when you're young can carry you through all of those difficult teenage years. It's when something is young that it's formative. The skull of a baby is soft, and mothers shape the head of their child so that the child is going to have a lovely shaped head, meaning that it will be symmetric, and what grows and develops on the inside will be similar. However, it is this very infantile suppleness of the mind that makes it the bane of the concentrator. It's exceedingly difficult to get control of the mind. It's exceedingly difficult to get control of every thought. It seems almost impossible at first. It seems easier to get a pinch of air than to be able to control the mind. But that's exactly what we do. The first stage of concentration is to create a single thought and hold it, without distraction, without interruption. That, of course, raises the question, what is a thought? Now, there are two basic schools about what a thought is. One maintains that thought is an image, or it is a form. And it is the school that maintains that a picture is worth 1,000 words. The other is that a thought is an invisible corpuscle of meaning, and that the form or imagination is an unnecessary illusion. I've even talked to physicists who are physicists of physiology, and they think that imagination is static in the brain. And they have experiments that they can show you that they can produce the static, and sure enough you see pictures. Obviously they've never tried creating an imaginative form. The first school obviously believes that form is inseparable from matter. I think you get that idea. I don't have to propound on it. That the form and the meaning are at one. However, in the transcendental realms, beyond the concrete mind, there is indeed life, and there is indeed meaning that is without form. In fact, that's where the real meaning is. It isn't contaminated by form, you might say. In the phenomenal realms, from the concrete mind on down, the form appears to be increasingly predominant, so that by the time we get to the material world, in some cases, the form much exceeds the meaning. Now, even though the meaning is not of the same order of meaning as in the intelligible, transcendental, spiritual realms, it's pretty hard to find a form that is completely devoid of meaning, especially in nature. Though I think sometimes modern artists do their best to work at that activity and produce forms that have no meaning. So when we're talking about creating a thought, we're talking about creating a complete thought, form and all, meaning and imagination. We're thinking of something that is a truth, and that truth is given form. In fact, at first in this kind of exercise, the form can predominate. If we can produce accurate thought forms with an eye to meaning and truth, there's little trouble in attaining them. Sometimes people get stuck at that stage, or they produce only thought forms and get stuck and don't continue to look for invisible meaning. Madame Blavatsky, for example, has a lot to say about fakirs on the street that do just that. They are the washouts from the mystery school. They have failed because they have become hung up on the phenomenon of producing thoughts that are visible and that can, in fact, blow people's minds. For most of us, that's not a problem right now because we're pretty much seeking for meaning, sometimes so much so that we don't do the production of a form. So the exercise is very simple. It consists of imagining and holding an imagination in one's mind. You can do it by looking at nature first, or you can do it completely abstractly. I think most of us in the Rosicrucian work like to imagine a white rose and use that as a vehicle of reception for focused healing force. This is a white rose that is precipitated out of the light of truth. It may indeed copy the archetype of living white roses in the world, but it is a form capable of receiving and holding the truth, the love, and that healing panacea that comes from the life spirit, from the Christ. I don't know how much any of you have done, but when you begin an exercise like this, what happens is the images are faint. Sometimes they're irregular, and we learn very quickly how flexible imaginative thought is. There is the myth of Perseus, that when he sets out on his spiritual quest to get the Medusa's head, he is given a purse. And the purse of Perseus is such that it accommodates itself to whatever you put in it. And that's exactly what the mind is like. You can see an entire galaxy in the mind, or you can see one specific atom. And when you're first trying to gain control of the mind in the imaginative completion of a thought, you find out very quickly that it's kind of hard to hold that. Your mind just goes all over the place. However, with practice, we get better and better and better. We have to have the attitude that when we ask questions or when we take on an activity, we have to realize that it can be done. This is why it's good to have people that have accomplished things. Because we can say to them, if we don't let them be the authorities for us, but if we let them be the inspiration for us, we can say, they can do it, I can do it.
On the imagination and visualization, seeing it out there, or putting it inside your head, painting it inside, do you have thoughts on that?
I have all kinds of thoughts on that, but I'm not going to go into them. That's part of the heurism of it. You have to learn to distinguish how it works. And that's a long time. And I'm finding that the same things, I'm just now teaching myself how to draw at a rather late age for doing that. But there are problems that you have to solve in drawing. And those problems are the same problems that you have to solve in imagining in your consciousness. And I'm finding that the two activities are augmenting each other. That what I'm doing ocularly in trying to draw, in trying to solve problems of perspective and things like that, they're not the same thing as producing an object inside of yourself, eyes closed, but they're very analogous. And I couldn't teach you how to solve those problems. I could show you how I do it. And if you go to an art teacher will basically show you how you do it. In some cases, it may be more verbal, and they have an explanation that's helpful. But basically, you have to solve it for yourself. That's why the self-reliant, heuristic part of the spiritual exercise is so important.
Well, granted, I was told some years ago not to even try to put it inside the brain.
Well, I don't know. I don't even want to use the word brain at this point. When you close the eyes and you're in a different sphere of consciousness, I think it's an enormous distraction to be thinking about parts of the brain or things like that. It keeps you from the reality. A lot of spirituality is dead reckoning. You go straight at things. About 2 years ago, I got very close to seeing the Dalai Lama, and it was amazing. He gave a talk, and he had an interpreter, but if the interpreter screwed up, in just the least little inflection, he was there. But all the while, the Dalai Lama was monkey-facing with all of his monks and other lamas that were sitting in the front row. He was smiling at them, and you knew it was a joy of a fellowship that there was no thought of the spiritual life being drab or austere or anything like that. It was a joy that they were together. But then there came the question and answer series. And they asked him questions. And he gave answers. And he gave very good answers. And his answers were not doctrinaire. His answers, he could have stated them in all of they have a very, very complicated logic system in Tibetan Buddhism. And he could have given those answers that way, but he didn't. He went straight to the issue in a path that you never would have guessed. And I knew right then and there that this man was a concentrator, and he was not some diffuse meditator, because he knew that you go straight for it, and when you go straight forward, that is a creative activity. You see it in a way that it has never before been looked at. And I think similarly, you can get, I think everybody's gone through the neurosis of praying, like, what are you praying to? Are you praying to the divinity in yourself? Are you praying to the God of our solar system? Are you praying to the Supreme Being? Are you praying to some invisible in the absolute? And you can get neurotic about that, but those are just distractions. If you center, it all lines up, so to speak, so that the divinity in you and the divinity of the solar system or the Supreme Being of it all gets rectified. And it's something that if you want it bad enough, you go straight for it. I think most of us, in some crowds, I'd have to be careful about saying something like that, because there are some people that go straight for it by saying, well, I get there much quicker if I take a drug or if I force myself out of my body or something like that. But in this crowd, it's going straight forward with some form of reason. So if we have the attitude that we can learn something and that we can do something, we'll improve. Now, there are no guarantees about time at all. It varies from individual to individual. It varies according to how much we put into it and how much we've put into it in the past. And it's very much like alimentation. We can't eat all of our food for the week on one day. But we'd have pretty miserable existences. We have to feed our physical body on a regular basis because it is a continuity. And with spiritual exercises, it's the same way. It's a minor criterion, but it's something that you do regularly. If you stay with it regularly, it stays with you. You can always tell something that is new from this incarnation and not from a previous rebirth by looking at whether, if you drop it, whether it goes away immediately. Like sometimes you can learn a language and that language stays with you. And that's probably because it, or a language like it, was part of you from a past life. But if you're trying to learn a language and you leave off for a week or something like that, it's gone. When you're doing something new, and what we're doing is something new, we're becoming new people. Our mind is very infantile, and And if we don't stay with it, it's going to disappear, and we're going to have to start all over again from the beginning. Now, at this point, we could watch this thought mature and see how the thought becomes a desire and such. But we've looked at that before. And while repetition is good, I'm not going to stand here and do repetition for the sake of repetition and go through that whole process again. And there's another reason for it, is because if this were an actual hands-on or minds-on class, we would actually be doing this. But it takes a long time for a thought to mature. Sometimes hundreds of years. Now, some things, like when we're driving along with the car and we see something in the road, our observation and the mental conclusion that the Spirit draws from it is almost instantaneous, and we adjust and we dodge that item that's in the road. But some thoughts take thousands of years, even for people who are skilled thinkers, people who are magicians and can manifest thoughts in the material world almost instantaneously. So instead of following a thought to its ripeness in the phenomenal worlds, let's look at a different facet of this concentration. Now, when we first try to form a thought form and hold it, the holding part is the difficult thing. It seems impossible. It seems that to create and hold the thought form with alacrity, that somebody would have to be a god to do that. But things do improve. If we find it, if we believe it's possible and continue working, we do it. When we first start, our minds are all over the place and they won't obey. However, when we rouse the determination, and the determination in the Spirit is very different than just plain desire, we gradually and slowly take control of our mind. And what happens is that the general will, not the specific will of the Divine Spirit, but the general will, the overall soul power that we have from all of our past rebirths, gets applied to this task of concentration. We can get a hold of ourselves. Now, as this happens, other things happen inside of us. I don't know how to say it. If we sustain the process of applying the general will of the Spirit to precipitating thoughts and holding thoughts, almost imperceptibly what happens is our consciousness lights up. We're not talking about light like external light. We're not even talking about light in the ethers or in the desire body. We're talking about intelligible light. When we discover something, or when we experience an abstract truth, everything lights up. And if we're deep in our concentration, at first we don't even notice it. Most of the time we're unaware of things that are going on inside of us. Now, this is something very different than what happens in the personality. If we try to approach this light too quickly, it's something like ripping the veil off the bride before the marriage, or the groom before the marriage. And if we are urged by our desire to follow into this light too quickly, what happens is that before the Spirit is sufficiently waked up and before it is in charge of its power, if we try to peer into it, we think of ourselves in our lower nature as gods. And we end up with a monstrous kind of egoism where a person walks around with an expression on the face that is almost like a mask, with a jackal-like smile that's saying, I'm a god and I know it. This is a problem that is very common. This is why all of those superstitions about marriage apply to the alchemical marriage, because those superstitions are founded in some kind of spiritual fact. If you ever read through, or if you're capable of listening to it in German, if you go through the libretto of Siegfried, the third in the Ring Cycle by Wagner, this little dwarf, Mima, that works for Siegfried before Siegfried has discovered his true spiritual nature, tries to tell Siegfried that he is his father. Siegfried is musing on the question of where has he come from, because when he's out hunting he sees the bear have young and such, and all he has is Mima. And Mima's just an ugly little dwarf. And Mima tells him, I'm your parent. And Siegfried sees through it. And that's the kind of thing that happens inside of us. See, Wagner was a seer, and he was able to put that stuff in his operas. And that's what happens if the lower nature arrogates to itself an awareness of divinity. So there's great danger. But if we persist in concentrating and awakening the power in the Spirit becomes stronger and stronger in its intent, and it pervades the personality. And at the bidding of the Spirit, which goes to another Wagner opera, it goes to Parsifal. Parsifal, when he's still an innocent, asks Gurnemanz, why, where is the path? And he's told by Gurnemanz that the path bids you, you don't find the path. And when the Spirit, in the process of applying itself to the activity of thinking, becomes sufficiently strong enough, the attention is changed from the thinking to the thinker. This is exceedingly important, because this is how selfhood is awakened. Yes, there are baptisms by the Holy Spirit. They're in the Bible, and it sometimes happens in Pentecostals. But a controlled, a growing, a gradual, a spiritual becoming, when the Spirit does the thinking and knows itself through the thinking process, we awaken spiritual self-consciousness. Now, there is a principle involved here. We're going way too slowly, and it's probably going to last a little bit long today. There is a principle involved here that is very important, and that is that this is a twofold activity. Part of the activity is transcendence, that one rises above the personality, one transcends the personality by having the Spirit control the personality, beginning with thinking in the mind. The second part of the process is the transference of attention from the earlier object of attention to the thinker. So there's always a transcendence and a transference. In effect, we have transcended one realm and transferred our consciousness to another thing. It is an activity that is like riding a bicycle. It is something that you get the idea of it. At first you can't get it, and at first you tend to put your consciousness back into the mind, because that's something that you're used to having your hands on or having your attention on. But the transcendence and the transference from the thought or the thinking process to the thinker is called, in Rosicrucian terms, a transition from concentration to meditation. One has passed in consciousness from the realm of concrete thought to the transcendental realm of ideational thought. From the phenomenal realms to the universal realms. It's a very big thing. Even the slightest awareness of an idea, one recognizes divinity. One recognizes true self. And one recognizes that self is operative everywhere in the same way that an abstract principle is operative everywhere. The difference is astonishing. We don't have to dwell on that. One is now in the realm of ideas. Now we have to make a little digression. We always have to make digressions. The word meditation is one of those garbage can words. It means all kinds of different things to different people. Even among those who are aware of the transcendental realms, sometimes misuse the word meditation. And some people try to practice meditation before practicing concentration. And that is a great mistake. It's a mistake that is similar to teaching a little child to think when it's 7 or 8 years old. It can do it because the Spirit is there. It can be forced into thinking, but it's very much like a little child being forced into being a parent because one of the parents dies. In some ways, the development of the finer things in the personality are bypassed and they don't develop. And it's very important that we have that alertness, that we have that attention, that we have that vividness of consciousness. You can always tell someone who has tried to practice meditation when that meditation has not been a natural consequence of concentration, because it's very floaty. The consciousness is all over the place. There's not a recognition of something being more important than something else. We're talking about the realms of God. And in spirit, things are more important. Some things are more important than other things. The people that we admire the most in life and the people that we think are the most venerable in life are people that are purposeful. And if it's that way with human beings who are just small expressions of divinity, it certainly is that way in the spiritual realms, that some things are more important. So it's the thing of it is, in the same way that a flower closes in on itself and matures into a fruit, concentration matures into meditation. If you try to skip, you're going to be leaving out something that's essential. It's not the kind of consciousness we want. Strangely, or not, maybe not strangely, the same people that don't like observation exercises and don't like the objectivity one gets from observation exercises are the same people that would just as soon do away with concentration. Very sad mistake. It's sort of like you have a hole in your character. You're missing something. The people who do this, we don't want to be down on them, and we don't want to put all kinds of negative thoughts to them. We want to be alert to the danger that can happen with this kind of thing. But, they're still human beings. They're still divine beings, and we don't have no reason to down them. We won't discuss meditation. It's very difficult to do. My development in that is very small, which makes it even more difficult to do because I'm not going to talk about something that I don't know about And when I mean know, I mean not in a book reading sense, but in a full-fledged transcendental experience. I'm familiar with a lot of people that have experienced that, but even if to look at it as second-hand information, it's too vast. I have complete confidence in the divinity, and from the things that already have unfolded from doing activity, that each of you will come to that, and I will come to that. We don't need to talk about that. Now, there's one aspect of it that is relevant, and we can talk about, and that is we're going to carry the principle further. When we have ideas, the lights go on. Whether we are conceiving ideas or whether we are perceiving ideas, one becomes more conscious in general. One becomes conscious of conception. Not the conception of one idea, but of conception in general. And one becomes conscious of light, but again, it's an intelligible light. It's a wonderful feeling. I don't know, feeling isn't the right word, but I don't know how to say it. But eventually, it dawns on us, or light is brought to us. Surely every idea we conceive, we know ourself, because ourself is the idea through which we are recognizing the other ideas. This is self with a capital S. But eventually, we recognize that that light is common to all ideas, and that every being that is a focus of the universal spirit has that light conscious or common to it. It dawns on us in the same way or in an analogous fashion that the thinker dawns on the person doing concentration. We recognize the presence of ourself in the process of thinking, and we recognize the presence of something beyond selfhood, a light or a knowing or a conceiving that is beyond selfhood anytime we're working through the self and conceiving ideas. It is a kind of selfness. In fact, in the Christian mystic initiation, one is brought to an awareness of this at the same time that one is brought to an awareness of self. So the process is the same. There is a transcendence and there is a transference. One transcends self and lives or has one's attention in life spirit. So the transference of attention is from ideas to the conceiving of all ideas, from truths to the truth, from objects of light to light. This is the baptism in Christ. In Rosicrucian terminology, it's called transcending from meditation to contemplation. The words aren't important. There isn't an abandonment of self. The self is still there. But one sees it in the eternal other. Because the experience in the selfness, one is always in as when you love and care about another. It's always the other. And this is how one solves the problem of self. One gets beyond self. I don't know that it's wise to verbalize that. But the process, we are told, this is something that is beyond even my vaguest experience. The process goes a step further. That in the awareness of life, or in the awareness of light, or in the awareness of truth, one begins to sense that there is a power that is behind it, that there is a subtlety, or that there is being that is so subtle that it is completely invisible. I mean, this is to a consciousness that is beyond ideas, so we're talking great subtlety. And in the experience of that, which though it may not be direct, by not being direct I mean we understand the power of a battery by the light that it can light up. When we understand that invisible power, and when we understand that creativity that is so creative and is so powerful that any kind of manifestation of it as it, including light, would be a distraction from it, or would be not it, is very difficult to conceive. We're talking about ultimate power. And in Rosicrucian terminology, this is called passing or transcending from contemplation into adoration. And one kens, or one knows or feels through the feeling of the life and light, the power that is behind it, the generous creativity that is behind it. You can't, I don't know that one can transfer one's consciousness directly into it. I assume it's possible, but I can't speak about something like that. So everything is in everything. A good song or a good poem is good for a long time. And if it's a really good song or a really good poem, we get more out of it each time, and we can go deeper and deeper into it. By the way, if you want to read about things that get to the level of transcending the light spirit into the divine spirit, and even deeper than that, I recommend a very hard read, a very, very hard read, and I recommend reading the complete writings of Meister Eckhart, because he's the only person. I've read the Neoplatonists. I've read everybody who's tried describing transcendental experiences, and nobody that I've read goes as deep in concentration into the explanation or description of spiritual states that are that lofty than Meister Eckhart. But it's a tough read, and you may have to read a page over 20 or 30 times to recognize what he's pointing at. It's not easy at all. So, if a good song or a good poem is something that is progressive, a good spiritual exercise is certainly progressive. And the principle of transcendence and transference, which is just another way of saying what we talked about yesterday when we talked about observation and discrimination, that can be taken to another level beyond what we are talking about. Earlier, we mentioned in the early talks that the concrete mind has 4 levels, that we function primarily in the continental region. We think our concrete things about forms, about objects. Beyond that is the oceanic region. And that if we persist in our thinking, even after we have transcended into the spirit, our thinking can go deeper in a different way, such that we can take the thoughts of form and we can transcend into more thinking in the oceanic region. And what happens in the oceanic region are creative thoughts about life. What we do now with DNA is a manipulation of form. What we do with cloning is a manipulation of form. But we're now talking about something much beyond that. We're talking about a degree of adeptship where the same simple exercises are carried to a level of depth that we can think in such a way that we can bring forms to life. Now, if that isn't a strong motivation to practice an exercise, if we realize that some little plant, some little euglena, or some little algae is only going to live as long as we can concentrate and penetrate that deeply into the oceanic region of thinking, what is a motivation? We can get to that degree of thinking. Obviously, this can be carried, same principle is carried. We're told in the Cosmic Conception that at some very distant time in the future, we will be able to bring plant life to experience desire. So that everything that we first learn to experience by observing and discriminating, and then when we learn through the process of concentration and transcendence into the spiritual principles that reflect into the forms that we have observed and discriminated, eventually we are able to bring the Spirit to bear in such a way that we can create the things that we first experience by observation. Now, eventually, we'll take the stuff of the mineral kingdom and bring it all the way to a point when it can think for itself, where it reaches a human-like state. We're talking about something very, very profound. We're talking about things that are millions of years ahead of us. And I don't want to get into that kind of talk because that's often just, sounds almost like drunken talk to talk about things too fantastic. But the thing is to bring to our realization that there is no end to what we can do with the very few simple things that are given to us. There's no end to the depth that we can go into the divinity in our own being and bring it out in a creative way. There's no end to the way that we can love and that we can carry things and give love in such a way that we really are divine beings. I won't tell you what it is, but there is another level of the same exercises that goes deeper yet. The same process of transcendence, transference, and penetrating deeper. The principle is that the more you penetrate and concentrate deeply and give of yourself to something, the more the Spirit rises. The center of our existence is the mind. The mind is located around the center of our existence. And by penetrating deeper into material expression through the mind, we penetrate more deeply into the Spirit. The whole principle of transcendence and transference eventually becomes self-collapsing. Because in the same way that we concentrate and transcend to something that is already there, in the self-collapsing state of it, the divine does the same thing. And in an odd, almost gibberish way, God is God to God. And that by going within and giving itself to something that can possibly be more within itself, penetrating deeper than it has ever gone before,
it becomes more itself in spirit. We have the picture of the stereopticon in the cosmic conception, where we say things from the spirit are projected through the mind into matter. We could almost look at it the other way, that the deeper the intended consciousness is concentrated into the center of our being, the more spirit and matter radiate within that cosmic root substance that everything is in. Everything radiates from that center. I hesitate to go any further. We've probably gone too far in the first place, but we've seen a little bit of progressive spiritual exercises, both in observation, both in concentration. This is like a whole school of concentrated exercises. Tomorrow we'll talk about a different kind of exercise, again based on cosmological principles, but that's the exercises that work the best, based on reality. So let's close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better every day. Lord, it's from the house, meditation of our hearts, acceptable in Thy sight. Didn't last quite as long as I was afraid it might have.